uh, what is a Pmbok project lifecycle, and then how and then in detail about the agile delivery lifecycle, and then try to see what are the Pmbok processes and knowledge areas, and how these processes and knowledge areas are mapping to the agile lifecycle. And finally, the agile approach for each knowledge area. So we will, because of the duration of the webinar, which is going to be for 1 hour, we will try to take the questions from all the participants and try to address some of those depending on the time at the end, and we will try to discuss as many questions as possible. But if we have too many questions because of time constraints, we would probably take it offline, and I will try to respond to the questions that you have. So moving on, if we take a look at the project lifecycle from Pmbok, the project lifecycle is generally it's a collection of different project phases, and these phases are determined by the needs of each project or each organization. And as you see, we have an initial phase where the project is initiated, and then there could be different intermediate phases, and finally these phases relate in a final culmination of a deliverable, which is the final phase. And so this is how Pmbok at least says, and that a project lifecycle is, it starts with an initial and then has a set of phases and final phase which culminates in a deliverable. And now if we try to look at this from an agile perspective, so you have what is called as the agile planning, and then we have a set of releases, and we do a project retrospective or a product retrospective at the end. And so the agile is mainly, if you see the agile, it's first kicked off by key processes where we have the vision and the product roadmap, and probably also a product or a product backlog, as you call it. So these processes somehow, if you see, they loosely correlate with the Pmbok processes, which we will see later. So in Pmbok you have a process called as develop project charter and developing the project scope statement, the preliminary project scope statement. So if you see these processes related to vision, product, and roadmap, they loosely map to the Pmbok processes of developing a project charter. And then, of course, there could be other types of processes as well in Agile, which could include like environmental setup and architectural documentation. And these kinds of processes are depending on the organizational needs, and there could be even some processes like feasibility study and business case identification and things like that. So, now if you see the second part here, each project could have what is called as a release or a quarter. And if you take the release is comprising of different iterations. So release is made up of several iterations, and if you try to sort of relate this to the Pmbok calls something called as subphases. So we call what is called a subphases. So release would probably map to a subphase in a Pmbok. And then if you want to talk about iteration, so there are what is called as iteration, which is one time box of work. So it could be, for example, if you talk about Scrum, it could be a sprint, or a 2-week or a 3-week, or depending on whatever duration you fix. And that sprint ends finally in an iteration demo, and there could be a sprint review or a sprint retrospective where you do the lessons learned, so which is similar to the lessons learned. And further down, if you split that up, you go to the daily work. Each iteration consists of daily work, what you do, and the daily work would correlate to what is called as the tasks. So we have different tasks, and at the end of the day, we see where we are with regard to the daily progress, where we are with regard to the number of story points that we have already completed and things like that. So this is how an agile life cycle generally looks. And if you try to map it to the Pmbok, it's just that we are dividing the releases into Pmbok subphases, and there are intermediate phases as you see in the Pmbok, and Agile is somewhat using the same approach. So if we quickly move on and check what are the processes in Pmbok, so we have the initiating process, the planning process, the executing process, monitoring, controlling process, and then of course the closing process. And so if I just try to explain this from an agile perspective, we have the initiation phase. These are different life cycle stages of agile, as you call it, a project, a release, iteration, and the daily work. So you can call it as agile fractals. So in the agile initiation stage, you would still be doing what you are doing in a Pmbok process, where you are doing the business case study and or studying the feasibility of a contract. And as we saw in the agile cycle, we have what is called as the visioning and the product roadmap, and that's what we are doing in the planning, where we are kicking off and visioning, and we are doing the visioning meeting and doing the product release roadmap planning. So this is about the planning phase, how a project what you would do from a project perspective in Agile with regard to the planning phase. And in the executing phase, of course, you would go ahead with the incremental, iterative, and incremental delivery of the software. And then we have the monitoring and control phase, where we are regularly reviewing our deliverables, and probably where we are having a product demo or project demo, and where we are signing off on the deliverables. And then, of course, at the end of the project, we do a project retrospective, similar to what we do in the traditional projects, or what Pmbok calls it as lessons learned. And if you talk now from a release perspective, in the initiation phase, we would probably define the theme of a release, the roadmap and the theme of a release, and then proceed with the release planning, and then continue with the same iterative approach. And at the end of the release, we do what is called as a release retrospective. And if you take it from a sprint or an iteration perspective, so we do the iteration planning and then work through the different features, and we are, of course, checking where we are progressing with regard to each sprint on the daily stand-ups and the burn down charts. And at the end, we do what is called as a iteration retrospective, or in Scrum, if you want to call it, it's like a sprint retrospective. So sprint review, sprint demo, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. And on a daily basis, this would on a daily work aspect, if we see this, we don't really have anything specific for initiation here. So it's listed here as having a cup of coffee or morning tea or whatever. And then when we talk about the planning, we do what is called as a daily stand-up meeting. So there we discuss what we have done yesterday and what we are going to do tomorrow. So it's sort of a planning there. And then, of course, we are doing the daily work as such, where we are working through the tasks. And monitoring and controlling is like addressing the obstacles or whatever impediments are reported by the team. And we finally record the progress on a burn-down chart to see where we are with regard to the iterations, or how we burnt the plan, have we implemented the planned number of user stories for that particular day, or are we keeping up with the velocity that we had planned initially. So this is mainly to talk about the mapping of the Agile to the Pmbok processes. And moving on, we have what are called as knowledge areas in Pmbok. So we have the integration management, and then we have the scope management, the time management, cost management, and the quality, human resource communication, the risk management, and procurement management. And then we have stakeholder management, which is quite closely related with your communication management. So we will now see how this would map into a map on an agile perspective. So if we start with the integration management, we have what is called as develop project charter, and this is one of the first steps of Pmbok. And so in this, if you look at the traditional Pmbok approach, you will try to probably obtain input and seek feedback from the relevant stakeholders or appropriate parties, and which you would also do the same thing in Agile, where you have the vision justification meeting. And the only thing is that we invite the team and also the interested stakeholders, so where the objective and the requirements are clearly discussed. And if you see the Pmbok approach for the project charter, you need a proper business case and associated documentation to obtain project approval. And Agile doesn't strictly say that there should be a business case or an associated documentation, but that means that approval can be obtained by any suitable means. So there could be someone in the project board signing off, or you can obtain an approval from the sponsor or whoever is the proper authority. And this is with regard to developing a project charter. And the second process, if you see in the Pmbok integration management, is develop project management plan. And if you try to see in the Pmbok approach, you formally create a document a proper project management plan as per the Pmbok template and as per the requirements, where you clearly also indicate the subsidiary plans. But if you start with the Agile approach for this, I think the key thing is that you agree on what framework and what processes the team will follow, and then you just facilitate, you just ensure that the team has understood the methodology and how it will handle each iteration, and how you can informally documentation the results, and how you will ensure that it's available to stakeholders. So for example, it could be a wiki page or whatever, where you could update the results, update the plans, or update the document the working agreement. So there is no need for any official documentation as strictly mentioned in the Pmbok. So but still you still have what is a prepared project or a developed project plan, project management plan phase. So this is what says that this Agile is still probably using the process, but it's using its own approach for the process rather than doing it in the traditional way. And then moving on to the next process, we will have what is called as directing and managing the project work. So so in case of Pmbok, we try to execute the project as such, and in Agile we will do what is called as what are called as iterations or sprints, and then you do that. Then after that, you do the monitor and control work, where you need to ensure that all the project is progressing as per expectations, where you do what are called as iteration review meetings. And if you take the normal Pmbok, you do the comparison, compare with the actual performance that was desired, like doing variance analysis. So it's the same that you do in Agile, what are called as sprint reviews or iteration reviews. And then, of course, you do the reporting, whatever is agreed, whatever you agreed during the project planning meetings. So informally documenting the results in your wiki or wherever. And then we have what is called as change control process. So Pmbok actually says a very complicated change control process. So before we do proceed with that, I just have a small poll question. So in Pmbok, we have what is called as a change control board. So I just want you to ask you whether we have something like a change control board, or does Agile really require having a change control board? I think we will take a couple of minutes with this, and then we can see what people feel about the poll, and then we can discuss how the change control, integrated change control, can be performed in Agile compared to how it's performed in the traditional Pmbok. So, so the answer here is that we don't really need a change control board for Agile. So as far as in Pmbok, you need to establish clearly what is called as a change control board, and you really need to follow the process very extensively. Of course, you can think you can think of a change control board here, but here in Agile, it's much easier that you have a team which can be considered itself as a change control board. So the team discusses the whole thing, and of course, the key point here is that the customer is, of course, the final decision maker or the arbiter of the process of the change decision, but you don't really need to have an official change control board. So I think that's the answer. So I don't think we need a change control board in Agile. If you think that there is a one-member change control board, then that could be probably the customer, but the team is so much involved in working closely with the customer in Agile, so that we don't have any separate official change control board or change control board meetings to finalize this kind of thing. Moving on, so we were talking about integrated change control. So you do handle the integrated change control in Agile in such a way that you don't do the changes in between the iterations. So you do take the changes into account and update your product backlog, and you just move on to the next change. So you are in the way controlling the changes by adding the changes into the product backlog or agreeing in which iteration it will do. So changes are still handled in an integrated manner, but the process is much simpler compared with the Pmbok, and it's handled at a specific point of time, and it's addressed in the next iteration. So this is about performing integrated change control, and yeah, so the change requests, of course, could come out from various things like a product demo or something like that, and they are, of course, as I said, documented in the product backlog. Moving on to the close project phase, if we think about the close administrative closure of a project, I think we still need to do that in Agile also, where you clearly need to see that the administrative closure and the production readiness or the final acceptance happens, and the contract closures and other stuff still need to be performed, and the final project is handed off, and as you do a lessons learned in the Pmbok, Agile also does what is called as a release retrospective. So we still do a retrospective, project retrospective, or a release retrospective. So in that sense, you see, if you see the map here, I would say that most of the processes in integration management are still applied in Agile as well, or they could still be applied in Agile, but it's not so tightly coupled with the Pmbok. But it still is a good practice, and it could still be followed in Agile. And I would still say, knowingly or unknowingly, we would still be following the Pmbok processes in Agile. Moving on to the next area, and that is scope management. And scope management, as you see, we have the different processes. If we go back to the processes for scope management, we have planning the scope management, collecting the requirements, and then creating what is called as a work breakdown structure, and then validating the scope and controlling the scope. So these are the traditional Pmbok processes for scope management. If we move on, if we take a look at those from the Agile perspective, so preparing a scope management plan, we just try to commit to following the Agile framework here, or the Agile approach, where we use the backlog and decide what is the scope from the backlog. We do the plan the iteration, and decide what is the scope for each release, each iteration, and for the overall project. So this is what we do. And if we talk about preparing, yes.
Yeah, the screen is not shared.
Sorry guys, I think my screen was not shared because the presenter had changed, so I apologize for that. So we were now talking about scope management in Agile. So as I said, in the traditional Pmbok, we have for the scope management, we had the different processes here. So plan scope management, collecting the requirements, defining the scope, creating the work breakdown structure, and then of course validating and controlling the scope. So these are the traditional processes for Pmbok scope management. But if you look at the Agile approach, you don't really create, you do some scope, you do ensure that as a part of the scope management, you do ensure that you create you have your backlog and your iteration items and your sprint items finalized, and this is making sure that the team understands the overall Agile approach and how they would really consider what is the scope of this particular release or this particular sprint or iteration. And then in Pmbok, you see you have what is called as defining the scope, where you prepare a formal scope statement. And as far as Agile is concerned, you of course do conduct a vision meeting and clearly clarify the boundaries and scope and the product scope with the customer, and agree on what you will do for the specific iterations. So you formally do have the process of creating a scope statement here. And the next step would be creating a work breakdown structure. So in Agile, you do have you give this responsibility to the team, so that the team decides what kind of tasks or what kind of tasks, as you call it, or features, as you call it, that they are going to do. So you have the user stories defined, and you decide, like, the team will decide what kind of tasks it would do. And so this would probably translate to something similar to what you are doing in creating a work breakdown structure. And next key thing is the scope validation. So we are here ensuring that we meet the deliverables that have been completed, and we are verifying whether they are accepted or not accepted. And as you know, in Agile, we know what is called as definition of done when we define in the product backlog. So we ensure that in the validation of scope, we do the validation of scope by ensuring that the definition of done is complete, or we are meeting the defined the definition of done as defined in the product backlog. So and of course, depending on the acceptance or non-acceptance, the product backlog will be updated accordingly. So this is the way we are still doing the scope management or the validation of scope with regard to Agile. And the final process we have is controlling the scope. So we do ensure that we don't have any scope creep with regard to the traditional approach. And if you take the Agile approach, we ensure that we don't do any changes in an ongoing iteration. So we clearly tell the customer that if there is another change that's requested, then that needs to be handled in the next iteration or whatever by updating the relevant product backlog. And so that's the way we prevent the scope creep, or I wouldn't call it scope creep, but because Agile encourages changes and the scope keeps changing, so I wouldn't call it scope creep, but at least you ensure you control the scope within an iteration and take it to the product backlog. And so this is about scope control. So this was, as you see, the last process with regard to scope management, so validate and control scope. And moving on, we have the next process, which is the next knowledge area, which is time management. And so coming to time management, it's mainly about scheduling. And so as far as scheduling is concerned, if you see the processes for time management, we have the plan schedule management, and then you define the activities and sequence the activities where you would actually decide what are the dependencies and create the network diagram, and then estimate what kind of resources are needed for each activity and estimate the durations, and then develop the schedule and controlling the schedule. So these are the traditional time management processes for Pmbok. But if you quickly take a look at the Agile approach for the time management, so I think we have to be clear with the requirements for the project schedule, and this is done by facilitating discussions between the customer and the team. And if we talk about schedule development at a strategic level, in Agile you will mainly facilitate the collaborative creation of a release plan and assist the team in updating the release plan. And the second process is schedule so defining the activities. So you will still prepare a clear activity list in which in each iteration you will break down the list of features into a specific tasks and determine and which become a part of the backlog or which become a part of the iteration. And if you talk about defining the activity attributes like task owners, predecessors, successors, and they are defined in the iteration planning itself in Agile. And moving on with the so if you talk about the determining the activity duration, that is estimate activity duration. So here we are ensuring that the team is providing high-level estimates for the product in the backlog, and then more granular estimates or more specific estimates for the specific iteration or for the specific release that we are planning. And when it comes to activity sequencing, we have what I call as dependent tasks, which we need to ensure in the Pmbok. What Pmbok says that we need to build a network diagram which says we need to have a proper sequencing. So as far as Agile is concerned, the team, as you know, the teams, when the sprint planning or when the iteration planning is done, the teams will determine how to handle the task and how to handle the dependencies. And of course, there could be external dependencies coming in, and those things which might need to be tackled in the product backlog. And of course, there could be impediments coming in between. which are handled in the as a part of the daily work. And the next process was how do you estimate the activity resources. So here we know that for each work package in Pmbok we determine what are the resources for each of the work package, and similar to what we do in a planning for iteration. So we know clearly that this is the team which will do the iteration, and other resources, of course, the other resources who are outside the particular iteration, they are still planned at a higher level. So this is the way we plan for the activity resources. And when it comes to schedule control, here as far as we create the schedule, we create the project schedule, and we do that in Agile. We do the release and iteration plannings, and we have more specific tactical iteration plans. And when it comes to the schedule control, we still update if there are changes, we update the project schedule based on the approved changes, and then we do the rebaselining. And as far as the Agile is concerned, team still helps in updating. We know that as far as the iteration is concerned, no changes are allowed. So the team can complete the features without any distraction as far as the Agile is concerned. But of course, if we don't complete the desired features in the Agile in the respective iteration, then consequently the release product backlog and product roadmap and deliverables need to be updated. And this is the way we do the schedule control, and then automatically the plan for if there are additional iterations needed, then we do need to add those additional iterations as a part of the updated release planning. And so the main key point is that as far as Agile is concerned, we don't do the schedule control. We do the schedule control after the iteration or at the end of the iteration, depending on how. So we don't take it. It's more of incremental and iterative. So we don't take it. We don't take all the features and update the whole project schedule in between. So here we do it outside the iteration. Moving on to the next one, we will talk about cost management. So if we go to the Pmbok processes for cost management, we have what I call as plan cost management and estimate costs, determining the budgets and controlling the costs. I think so. As far as cost estimation is concerned, they can be performed using two different approaches. So I will just start with a small poll question here. Why we will do? We have two options here. So I just want to ask you, what is the best approach for cost estimation in Agile? We will take a small poll, and then we will discuss why we use the specific approach. Okay, so we have two approaches, the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. And if you take a traditional project planning approach, a project manager will generally create the complete work breakdown structure and then break it down to create the lower level. So this is more like a so where you will do more like a bottom-up approach. But if you take agile projects, it's generally difficult to estimate them using a bottom-up approach, because it's very difficult to accurately predict the work at a task level and also with the dependencies. And additionally, there could be a lot of requirement changes that come with regard to agile. So I think people generally go for the best recommended way to do an approach for agile is a top-down approach. So that's why we go for a top-down approach. So when we talk about moving on to the processes, so when we talk about estimating the costs, so cost estimates will be done using top-down techniques with regard to agile. And then getting the resources, so we know we clearly have the team engaged in estimating the items and planning the releases. And when we talk about the cost budgeting, in the case of a traditional approach, we do prepare what is called as a cost baseline. The project manager prepares what is called as a cost baseline, and then he gets he derives the funding requirements from this baseline. With regard to agile, the team does help in the release plan, and from the release plan, the cost baseline can be derived by aggregating the costs of all the iterations. So if we plan the cost of, if we have 4 iterations, then we aggregate all the cost of each iteration and we arrive at a specific the specific budget, or what is called as cost budgeting. And moving on with regard to cost control, we perform what is called as earned value management in traditional Pmbok, where we check the earned value and the planned value. We also can do this in the case of agile. So if we take, for example, the traditional earned value method, we have the sum of all the work packages, like the schedule estimates their duration and effort. And if you take the case of agile, we have the number of story points planned for a particular release, and this could probably translate into an agile approach for the performance measurement baseline. And then if you talk about a schedule baseline, you can say that whatever are the total number of planned iterations for a particular agile project, then that could probably, or agile release, that could be probably called as the schedule baseline. And then when we talk about the budget, we have, of course, the budget, whatever we have planned in the case of similar to what we do in a traditional earned value methodology. So if we talk about the progress of when we talk about the progress, we can see in the case of the traditional approach, we have the total dollar value of all the work packages divided by the total value of the budget at completion. And similar to that, in Agile, we can say that whatever story points we have completed, or whatever we have completed, divided by the total number of story points that we had planned initially. So I could say that we do the earned value management or cost control in Agile similar to what we do in a traditional Pmbok. So in Agile, as we know, the team and the customer and the product owner is also invited for the budget, and the team, of course, remains responsible for the final delivery. And so this is about the Agile approach with regard to cost management. So it's more or less similar to the Pmbok, but the approach is different. We still continue to use most of the processes what we had in the traditional Pmbok approach, but it's just that we do it in a different way, or we do it in what is called as the Agile approach with regard to cost management. And moving on to the next process, we have quality management. And if you go to the list of processes, Pmbok processes defined for quality management, we have 3 processes: plan quality management, which is part of the planning process group, and then perform quality assurance, where part of the executing process group, and then control quality, which is part of the monitoring and controlling process group. And if we take the traditional, if we compare the traditional approach for a traditional quality management approach. So in the case of a traditional approach, we formally create what is called as a quality management plan, and there is quite an extensive amount of planning done with regard to the traditional approach. And if we talk about the Agile approach, we still do the quality, we still do ask the customer and the team to determine what kind of quality practices can be used, or what are the appropriate quality practices and standards. And these kind of things are not documented formally, but like they are documented informally using your whiteboards where you have the flip charts, and or in a wikis or wherever, where we agree what kind of quality metrics we have to track and what kind of automated tools we have to use. And we basically gain a consensus from the team on what will really be useful in determining the quality for the product or the quality for the release. So we still have the same, we still have an approach to quality management in Agile, but the approach is a little different, that we don't really create a formal quality management plan. We just try to agree on a consensus and try to see the best possible way we can do it. And moving on to the next step, which is performing the quality assurance. So if you take a quality assurance from a project, from a Pmbok approach, we do what I call as quality assurance audits, where we do review the quality processes and see how we can improve that. And with regard to Agile, we still do this because we have what I call as demos and reviews and retrospective meetings, and these would probably be translated into different processes. If the team feels that there is still something wrong with the processes what we are doing, that could still be adopted for the next iteration, or if we are not meeting the desired quality at the demo, then we could still track these or assign defects or changes which could be fixed in the forthcoming iterations or in the forthcoming releases. So this is basically with regard to quality assurance, and we do of course check with regard to our metrics as well, how we are faring with regard to our metrics, and we still ensure that we are moving on. We are moving on as per the planned as per the planned level of, or as per the planned metric what we had agreed at the beginning. So we have the next process, which is quality control. So this is, so these items what we discussed are actually part of the quality control, where we check about the defects and also about what the why the metric, specific metric, is not okay. And if it's okay, if it's not okay to do manual testing, then how do we do the bulk of our testing and things like that. So this is how it's handled in Agile. So I think we pretty much do a quality control in Agile as well, and as we do in any project. So in the case of Agile, in the case of Pmbok, we do monitor the quality with using various tools, and for Agile, whatever metrics we have agreed, so burn down charts or other metrics, and we do find the root cause analysis why we are not progressing as per the desired velocity, and try to overcome this in the next iteration. So this is about quality management. Moving on to the next process in Pmbok, which is the HR management. We have various processes for Pmbok in the HR management. So we have the planning process for HR, and then we have the other processes where we are acquiring, developing, and managing the project team. So we will see how do you do this in an Agile approach and how do we do this in a Pmbok approach. So if we talk about the first part where we do about where we think about the HR planning, we create what is called as a staffing management plan after identifying the skills and the skill sets and the time frames needed for individual involvement in the project. And if we compare this with Agile, we still do this in Agile as well, where we created a dedicated functional team of specialists who ensure and then document this in the release plan, or record this in the release plan, like which of the resources will be used for which of the iterations and things like that. So we still do the human resource planning for Agile also, though we don't officially create any staffing management plan in the Pmbok as per the Pmbok template what we have. So, but we are still doing the process. And coming to the next process, which is acquiring a project team, we still do this in Agile as well, where we create a cross-functional team, and the members, all the members of the functional team understand that, and they have the responsibility to deliver the product. And we either negotiate for, we mostly negotiate for fully dedicated team members, and so in Agile it's probably better to have co-located teams, which increases the productivity. And so we are in a way doing the acquire project team with a different approach compared to traditional approach, where we try to save money by using virtual teams as well. So this is about acquiring the project team. And when we talk about developing the project team, if we compare with the traditional approach, we still have the co-location, which is one of the preferred strategy for Agile. And then we still do the team building strategies and have certain set of ground rules. And with regard to developing, we have what I call as retrospectives, unlike the traditional approach where we do conduct assessments and evaluate team performance. And because Agile is more like a self-learned team, so we're more like a self-learning team. So we do what I call as retrospectives and see what ways we can improve and deliver things better. And when it comes to managing the project team, we again do the same things, where we facilitate iteration reviews and retrospectives, and improve the performance of the improve performances, and assess those and assess whatever has been implemented by the team. So we would still say we do what I call as retrospectives with regard to managing the project team. So moving on, so this is what we have discussed. So we do conduct reviews, and we do coach team members in Agile as well, and see based on what we have done in the retrospectives. So facilitate the team in retrospective at the end of each iteration, and where we identify improvements and how we can do things better in the next iteration. So we are in a way Agile also doing most of the processes what are defined in HR management when compared with the Pmbok approach, with the traditional approach. Moving on to the risk management process. So we have, in the case of the traditional Pmbok approach, we have what is called as plan risk management, and then the other processes which are coming are performing quantitative and qualitative risk analysis. And then we, of course, have the planning the risk responses, and then monitoring and controlling the risks. And when it comes to the Agile approach, we we do have a risk management planning, but we don't really create a formal risk management plan as we do in the Pmbok. We, of course, discuss within the team to determine how we can manage the risk either formally, organically, or informally. And in the case of risk identification, we do document the risk identification in a risk register. In Agile, we also do the risk management by identifying the risks, but we have what is called as a risk board or a flip charts or whatever tools. And this is more or less visible to the team, and we are still identifying and documenting those risks. And when it comes to qualitative and quantitative analysis, we do very detailed analysis with regard to Pmbok, where we find the risk, the probability, impact, and use specific tools. And in regard to Agile, also the team facilitates in doing the qualitative analysis and seeing how to respond and post the results. And we still keep checking the risks as well. And we constantly review, as I said, we constantly keep reviewing the risks and as a part of the planning meetings and retrospectives. So Agile also, the main point is that Agile also does risk management, but not in a very formally documented as in the traditional Pmbok, where we have specific risk register templates and specific risk management plans. But it's more of more handled openly in team discussions. Moving on to the next area, which is the procurement management. So in the traditional approach, we do evaluate sellers, and in the Agile approach, the team is also engaged in helping and evaluating the sellers, and based on their ability to understand or work in the Agile mode. And when it comes to contract negotiations, it's same. It's mainly it's ensuring that the seller has the ability to enact in an Agile fashion. And when it comes to the lessons learned, the contracting or the agency will engage with the team to understand what are the areas of excellence and improvement as the contract is by using the retrospectives. And the closure contract is similar to what we have do in a Pmbok, where we need to still do the contract and include the results of the retrospectives. So this is somewhat the procurement management approach is similar to the traditional Pmbok. Of course, the type of contracts will depend on the different scenarios. And finally, when we talk about the communication management and the stakeholder management, we do the same thing in Agile, but we don't have any official communication management plan. It happens through more of face-to-face discussions, and we agree what exactly needs to be communicated at what frequency and things like that. And when we talk about stakeholder management, we try to invite stakeholders more for the meetings and planning meetings and iterations. And as far as Agile is concerned, the stakeholder is still active till the end of the project. He is, unlike in it, I'm talking about communication management and stakeholder management. Yeah, so we were discussing about communication management and stakeholder management. So I think if you talk about Agile and if you talk about Pmbok, the stakeholder influence is reducing in a traditional Pmbok, as they say, but in Agile, however, it remains strong and does not decrease, because he's quite closely involved in every iteration and till the end of the project. So yeah, I think we have more or less covered all the areas of the knowledge area. So my key takeaways for this would be that the Pmbok is generally a standard for recognized good practices. We can still use these in Agile, but in a different approach, what we want. And if you talk about Agile projects, they are made up of releases, and they are similar or synonymous with the Pmbok's project phases. And if you see the iterations, they are closely related to the sub phases, and iterations are initiated and planned just like what we do in the phases of a project. So these are the key takeaways for this, and yeah, and this is one of the references used for this particular webinar or presentation. So I think we are just about on time to take maybe a couple of questions, and I think the rest of the questions will need to be answered offline due to time constraints. So I hand it over to the organizer because I've not received any questions so far. So if we can put up the questions, we can just discuss maybe a couple of questions, and probably the rest of the questions can be taken offline.